Once we've got all of our foliage objects vertex painted, now's a good time to consider the scale that we want these to be in. I'm going to bring up our mannequin for scale, and we can see we have made a forest, not a meadow. And maybe that's okay for our purposes, but I want to make sure these are more like grass size. So because we have our object origins all set at the world origin, I feel confident we can scale these down to be something a little more kind of at knee height or less. You know, again, if we want to separate these out to kind of see that, get a preview. They look terrifying, but I think that that's the scale that I was interested in. So let's call that. I want to make sure they're all back at the origin 0, 0. And I'm going to turn my mannequin back off. Now, if we look at the object scale properties, we can see that these numbers really aren't at 1 yet. We can look down here too and see that they're percentages of 1, but we want to make sure we apply this scale before we export these. So to do that, I'm going to hold down Control and press A on the keyboard, and I'm going to apply all transformations to variation 1, and we'll do this to variation 2. You can see those numbers reset to 1, 1, 1. All transforms, which includes location, rotation, and scale. So from here, now we're finally going to be ready to export. So we'll go to File, Export, FBX. Okay, we want to make sure we are limiting our export just to the selected objects, which at the moment is this object. Our object type should just be set to mesh. Our scale of 1 is great because we just set the scale. We want that to be 1. Forward should be -z forward, and up should be y up. If we go to geometry, we want to make sure our smoothing is set to face. That is important. We shouldn't be using subdivision. We shouldn't be using modifiers. And we want to make sure bake is unchecked. So I'm going to give this a name and make sure to include the variation number of the specific piece that we're exporting. So variation 1, we're going to make sure it's called variation1.fbx. Make sure we have the full name of our foliage species leading it. That will help in the future. And before we're done, we could save this as a preset because we're going to be doing a lot of this. So we can hit this plus sign here and say something like that. And then we can export that FBX. And we'll come in here, variation 2, make sure our scale is set. File, Export, FBX. Come and find our preset and set this to variation 2. And here comes variation 3. Export, FBX, our scale is set. Make sure we have our preset selected. And last but not least, variation 4. Making sure we just have one object open and selected in the viewport at once. We don't want to be exporting multiple of these things on top of each other. Okay, so that is exporting. We should be ready to go for Unreal now. We've got all of our FBX objects in a folder. The next thing we'd want to do is bring in our textures related to this. So if we bring in, I'm going to copy and paste my cans bones textures and make sure they're all living in this foliage folder. Okay, I've got my blend files outside, so my blend file that I'm using to generate these FBXs, I also want to make sure I save and keep in approximation. I also want to make sure these blend files are stored somewhere close to these FBXs, so if I come back and make changes later, I don't have to go hunt, as well as the textures being right there. Okay, so these should be ready to bring to Unreal and start to give them a little bit more life as they populate a landscape and start to get their wiggles and blow in the wind.